Today's recap, my friend, isn't like any we've done before, because today's movie tells the true story of British criminal Charlie Bronson. And of course, I know you're wondering right now, who is this Charlie Bronson? So let me tell you, he's the most dangerous prisoner in all of British history, a dangerous and violent criminal to the point that when he was released, he caused a lot of trouble in prison. And because of that, the Queen of England herself requested that he be released from prison to get rid of the nuisance. But he didn't listen and went back to committing even more dangerous and serious crimes so he could return to prison again, as if he had found his life in prison. So what's the story?
Give it a like, my friend, so we can get this video to as many people as possible. Let's start with the summary and figure everything out together. The movie begins with Charlie Bronson talking about his life, and we learn that Charlie was the only child of a conservative American family. Anyway, time went by and Charlie started school. And from that moment on, that's exactly when Charlie's problems started to show. He had a lot of hang-ups and psychological issues that suddenly turned him into a bully who loved causing trouble. As they say, almost every day he would get into a fight with a new classmate at school, beat him up, and completely destroy his self-esteem. Because of that, he was always getting suspended from school every few days. And there was a staff member at the school who would take him home after every incident, so his mom and dad would know their son was getting into trouble. Perfect! Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work. Misfortunes. But his parents were very passive and never reacted harshly toward Charlie. By the way, it was clear that Charlie possessed immense strength, setting him apart from all his peers in that regard. And this was a sign that we were dealing with a monster who would devour one by one. In any case, Charlie seemed to be growing bigger and bigger. And at that point, he took any job he could get. But he never stayed in any job for long because he kept getting into trouble. For example, when he worked for a while at a restaurant, he felt the job wasn't worth it. So what did he do? He stole money from the restaurant, my friend. It was that simple. And because of the theft from the restaurant where he was working, the police, of course, came to arrest Charlie. That's when Charlie's madness kicked in. He attacked the officers who had come to arrest him and kept beating them mercilessly. Anyway, not long after all that, Charlie married the girl he loved, whose name was Irene, and even had a child with her. But Charlie's situation after the marriage wasn't great. He was always in need of money, and his job didn't pay enough, so he decided to turn to theft and prepared his weapon. Perfect! Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work. One day, he robbed the local post office and stole a paltry sum, so insignificant that Charlie felt the post office didn't have any money at all, and that the government was lying to him. Anyway, because of what he did, Charlie was arrested and sentenced to 7 full years in prison. And that was the first time Charlie had ever been imprisoned. But of course, it wouldn't be the last. The funny thing, to be honest, is that Charlie's mom didn't care at all that her son was in prison. She just kept reassuring him that if he behaved himself for those 7 years, they'd be reduced to 4, and he'd get out early from prison for good behavior. But of course, that didn't make Charlie behave well in prison or act responsibly, because, he'd get out after about half the time. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work. On the contrary, when Charlie went to prison, he became many times more violent than before, and he also became increasingly crazy and bloodthirsty. Overall, you see that when Charlie first went to prison, his wife Irene went to visit him, but the visits were so cold that they barely spoke at all, and Irene left him. And she had already decided to distance herself from Charlie completely, which is exactly what she did. So basically, when Charlie went to prison, he didn't leave his cell for almost a whole year, and that's what caused Charlie to build up a huge amount of anger that he would unleash on the first person who came his way. And that's exactly what happened not long after. When they took Charlie out of solitary confinement and decided to put him to work with the other inmates, they put him in the prison's tailoring workshop. But he wasn't like the other inmates. Everyone else was busy working, but Charlie wasn't working. He just sat there doing nothing. So, of course, the supervisor of the sewing workshop came to Charlie and asked him to get to work, but Charlie refused. The supervisor was forced to call the prison guards, who proceeded to beat Charlie. But that's not the point. Charlie kept fighting back and wrestling with them, completely unfazed by their sheer numbers. This shows just how crazy Charlie is. And of course, because of what he did, Charlie had to be punished and was put back in solitary confinement. But after a while, Charlie was released from solitary confinement again, and we see that this time he's actually become a bit more respectful than before because he's now working normally in the prison. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work. So here's the deal. Charlie's currently in prison, and he's been making tea for the soldiers. He's working in the tea and beverage distribution area. One of the inmates,
a bit of a nutcase. Let's call him the crazy one. Asked Charlie for a cup of tea. Then he talked to Charlie and found out that he's really strong and that he should use his great strength to make money off of it. At that moment, Charlie liked what the crazy guy said, but he didn't respond or say anything to him. He just left him and walked away. But remember this crazy guy, my friend, because he's important to the story. In the time that followed, Charlie kept causing more and more trouble and getting into fights with the soldiers and so on. Because of the trouble he was constantly causing, he was moved from prison to prison in the hope that he would settle down in one and be a normal prisoner. But let me surprise you, my friend, and tell you that this never happened. In fact, the government suspected that Charlie wasn't normal at all, so they admitted him to the psychiatric ward at the hospital. Charlie's behavior didn't change at all. Instead of beating up the guards in prison, he started beating up the nurses at the hospital. One day, after he beat up the nurses, they locked him in a small room that was basically solitary confinement. Not long after, 2 nurses came to Charlie and asked him to take a medicine, but as expected, Charlie refused to take the medicine at all. So they came back several times, restrained Charlie, gave him a sedative injection, and then administered the medicine themselves. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.
And on that same day, we saw that Charlie was sitting with all the other prisoners in the common room, where they gather once a day. That is, when the nurses let them out of their wards. So basically, we saw that Charlie was there with everyone else, but he wasn't like everyone else. And the simple reason was that he was restrained and had also been given sedatives and other stuff like that, which made him unable to move or speak, as if he were paralyzed. And that, my friend, was the solution the nurses came up with to control Charlie. They'd take him away after a while. Charlie was fed up with the hospital because he didn't feel at home among the patients and wanted to go back to prison. So what does he do to get back to prison? Simple, my friend. Charlie decided to commit a murder so he could go back to prison and live the life he loves. So the question here is, exactly who is Charlie going to kill? It's simple. One day, Charlie was sitting in the hall where the patients gather, and there was a person in front of him, like that. He knew this person, and my friend, no offense to the word I'm about to use, but he was a real jerk. So he decided to finish him off. The guy walked right up to Charlie and started choking him, but the nurses came and pulled Charlie away from this stranger. Because of that, the stranger survived, so no specific crime to pin on Charlie, so he stayed just as he was in the psychiatric hospital. But Charlie kept causing trouble inside the hospital, more and more, and it was very clear that wherever Charlie was, he would cause more and more trouble and problems there. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.
And so, by a decision of the British Queen herself, Charlie was released from prison as an innocent man and became the most famous prisoner in British history because the Queen herself was the one who released him from prison to get rid of the filth he was causing. As soon as Charlie was released from prison, he found his mother and father waiting for him, and neither of them said a word to him. They were just... But the fact that he was released from prison shows, as we said, that they were elderly passive. And we could say that this was actually the main reason that turned Charlie into the crazy criminal we see today. When Charlie was released from prison, he went straight to live with his parents. But he was never happy with his life because he'd gotten used to prison life and loved it. And this life just didn't make him happy at all. The thing is, Charlie knew he had to get a job to make a living after getting out of prison. So he decided to go to his Uncle Jack to see if he could find him a job. So Charlie actually went to see his Uncle Jack, who was a total mess, always drinking and doing all sorts of things, God forgive me, and he wasn't doing anything right anymore. So Charlie sat down with him and asked about a job, and his uncle realized he didn't have any work for him, but he advised him to check with his friends who had been released from prison like him before. Maybe one of them could find him a job. To be honest, Charlie liked that idea, so he kept looking for his friends until he finally found a crazy guy who had been out of prison for a while and was now living a normal life. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.
Charlie ended up hanging out with the madman at a place like a casino that the madman actually owned. After the greetings and introductions, they asked Charlie if he had a job, and the madman knew he had a really good one for him, one that suited his great fighting skills. In short, the job was for Charlie to take part in street fights for money. And of course, since Charlie loves violence, he was totally on board with the job. Anything that brings him money is fine. Then we see that Charlie meets this girl who works for the madman. Her name is Ein, and just like that, he fell in love with her at first sight. Eine. He wanted to be with her all the time. Not long after, Charlie took part in his first street fight, which was against a guy just as strong as Charlie himself. But Charlie kept hitting him left and right without mercy until he managed to defeat him and win the match. After this intense fight, Charlie went to crazy because he wanted his money.
So they gave the crazy guy the money, which was very little, and that's what bothered Charlie. But the crazy guy knew that the big money hadn't come in yet, so he asked Charlie to keep working with him and he'd get more money later. So Charlie agreed and kept working with the crazy guy in the streets, and literally, Charlie was fighting anything that came his way. People, dogs, anything, and he always came out on top in those fights. And of course, because of that, he started making more and more money, and he was still living with Ine because he loved her, like I told you. But one day, Charlie told Ine that he loved her and wanted to marry her, but Ine's response was clear and incredibly shocking because Charlie realized she didn't love him. He was just someone she'd been spending pleasant time with, nothing more. In other words, she was basically telling him, I'm trash, and you're a respectable human being, so we can't be together. Perfect! Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.
Then I found out she was in love with this guy named Brian, who was about to get married, and she was totally into him because he was a bad boy, just like her. Of course, this really got under Charlie's skin, but he didn't say anything or hit her because, as I told you, he loved her and couldn't bring himself to hurt her. But Charlie wanted her to love him and marry him at all costs. So what did he do? It was simple. Charlie took matters into his own hands. He went to a jewelry store, attacked the staff, and stole a ring and a lot of other jewelry. Then he left and went to Lion, giving her the jewelry so she'd marry him. But Lion told him again that she couldn't marry him because she loves Ibrahim and won't ever leave him at all. And the second time, my friend, you're breaking Charlie's heart. But anyway, Charlie doesn't have time to get too upset or affected because the police arrive and arrest him for stealing the jewelry, as we said, and for attacking the employee there. But after a while, we see Charlie in the new prison he's been sent to. And oh, what a place it is. The prison warden summoned him, and it was clear that he was a crazy person too, and not easy to deal with at all. The warden told Charlie that he knew him very well, and that he had spent a long time in solitary confinement, and they knew that if he caused any trouble, they would lock him up in solitary again. So Charlie agreed to his words and left. But if you think Charlie wouldn't cause any trouble this time, you're unfortunately wrong, because the trouble actually started not long after all that. While Charlie was sitting in his cell, the prison librarian came to him to hand him a book to read. But Charlie did something completely unexpected. As the librarian entered the cell, locks him inside. Then he addresses everyone in the prison, informing them that he has a hostage, the librarian, and that if they don't come to him, they'll be killed without hesitation. Of course, the poor librarian hears all this, terrified and not knowing what to do. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.
Not long after, one of the soldiers came over with a phone and handed it to Charlie so he could speak with the prison warden. The warden, in turn, asked Charlie not to kill the librarian as soon as he spoke to him, and then asked Charlie what he wanted in exchange for releasing the librarian. At that moment, Charlie didn't know what to say. He simply didn't know why he was doing this. He was just lashing out, fighting, and letting his inner rage out, but he didn't want anything. So Charlie didn't respond to the warden or tell him what he wanted. He just kept cursing at him. Because of this, the warden decided to use force and sent soldiers after Charlie. It was left to Charlie, my friend, and as usual, they kept beating each other up. Not long after all that chaos, you see Charlie in solitary confinement, tied up so he doesn't hurt anyone else. After a short while, the warden comes to see Charlie. The warden knew Charlie didn't want him to take any action against him, so he had no choice but to leave him a long time in solitary confinement to learn his lesson. Then the warden left, and Charlie was back to sitting alone. Not long after all that, we see that Charlie has come out of solitary confinement and has started to become a calmer and more mature person, to the point that he decided to attend workshops in prison to learn drawing. And the one who was in charge of these workshops for Charlie, or rather teaching him, was a very famous painter named Felt. Felt was very impressed with Charlie's drawing and felt that Charlie was starting to find his true calling in something other than crime, anger, violence, and all that stuff. One day, to encourage Charlie even more, they found out that he'd take it and go to the prison warden and give him the drawing Charlie had made so the warden could see that Charlie was starting to change, and that might make him ease up on his punishment. Perfect! Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work. And sure enough, without wasting any time, they took Charlie to the warden and showed him the drawing Charlie had made. But the warden refused to even open it or look at it. Of course, this move, which wasn't exactly the best, upset Charlie and made him very angry at Phil because he saw Phil as the one who had put him in this awkward situation. But anyway, they left. They went and sat together in a room in the prison, and Phil kept trying to cheer Charlie up, telling him that his drawing was beautiful.
They also knew that after a while, he would talk to the warden and the entire prison administration to get Charlie out of prison completely, because his behavior had actually started to improve, and prison was no longer the right place for him. But Charlie, my friend, didn't care about any of that, and was still mad at Phil. He asked Phil to make them 2 cups of tea to drink together. So Phil, not understanding anything, got up to make the tea. At that moment, Charlie took the opportunity and went to Phil in the empty spot he was making the tea and kept choking him until he passed out. After that, Charlie didn't stop there. No, he also tied Phil up and started going crazy, getting paints and drawing on him and so on. And everything Charlie is doing is just because he literally feels that he's been humiliated in front of the warden, so he decided to take his hatred out on him and do all sorts of crazy things, even though Phil didn't deserve it at all. In fact, Phil was actually looking out for Charlie's best interests and wanted to get him out of prison. But what can you say? Anyway, after a while, of course, the warden and all his guards came and asked Charlie to open the door and let Phil out. But Charlie refused and told them he wouldn't let Phil out until he finished the drawing he was on him. Literally. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work. Charlie then told them that if they tried to break in, he'd kill Phil. So, of course, no one went in at all. Charlie then finished the drawing he was doing on Phil's face, and when he was completely done, he told the soldiers they could come in and take Phil. And of course, my friend, when the soldiers came in, they kept beating Charlie while he was beating back at them as usual. They took him away and put him back in solitary confinement, where he'll likely spend the rest of his life, because the prison administration decided they'd never let Charlie out of solitary. He causes trouble and chaos, and they can't stand him anymore. You see, my friend, Charlie has a severe mental illness, uncontrollable rage, and that's actually the root of all these problems from the start. He has a disorder or something like that makes him do all this against his will. It's not his choice. Anyway, with that point and with Charlie's return to solitary confinement, the movie ends. And what I want to remind you of, my friend, is that it's based on a true story about a dangerous prisoner who was in Britain. And by the way, this prisoner spent exactly 34 years in prison, 30 of them behind bars, and he's supposed to still be in prison to this day, with no chance of being released. Honestly, this is a very good solution, because someone like Charlie, if he were released, would cause nothing but trouble. That's the side he knows, and that's how the movie ends. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Charlie really deserves all this, or is he sick and needs more care than this? Tell us in the comments. That's it. Bye. Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.